Hi, I'm Rachna Vyas. I'm the Deputy Chief Executive of NHS Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland Integrated Care Board.
Hi, I'm Roger Klein. I'm a Research Fellow at Middlesex University, and I do research and work with organisations and groups within the health service around culture, workforce culture in the health service.
Hello, I'm Professor Ivan Brown. I'm a former Director of Public Health. I am currently a Professor of Public Health at De Montfort University in Leicester, and I also sit as a non-executive on our local hospital trust.
Hi, I'm Sandra Goatley, and I'm the Chief People Officer at the Kent and Medway Mental Health NHS Trust.
And hi, I'm Mary-Anne Farrow. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at Health Innovation Kent, Surrey and Sussex, and I'm also a Non-Exec Director at Kent Community Trust and Kent Mental Health Trust.
Welcome to part 2 of our feature podcast series, our 3-part journey called Standing Firm in Power and Resilience. In our first series, The Power of Our Story, we talked openly about the messages and impact of the St. George's flag, how a single symbol can mean pride for some, concerns for others, and how those meanings shape the everyday experiences of people working across our public services, people in our communities, and even in our homes. It was honest, it was challenging, and it reminded us of why these conversations still matter. Well, we're now taking that honesty into a different space. Today, we're exploring psychological safety and what it really feels like for senior leaders to speak up about sensitive and uncomfortable issues in their organisations. You know, we often work hard to engage staff in psychological safety, but sometimes we miss checking in on our senior leaders, the very people carrying the weight of accountability and expectation. And if we're serious about embedding inclusion as part of our cultural DNA, we have to ask, what's getting in the way of leaders bringing these conversations forward as everyday organisational priorities? Well, you already know who our panel are, so let's get started. This is part 2, Strength in the Struggle. And our leading question today is this: how much real psychological safety do senior leaders feel when speaking up about sensitive and uncomfortable issues, and doing so without the fear of being cancelled?
Word, isn't it? Cancelled. That's the fear at the moment, that it's very easy to become cancelled, and it's very easy to become effectively the scapegoat for what a lot of people know is actually the right thing to do and the correct way of living as a human being. Forget global majority or not. It is, from a humanist perspective, the right thing to do. The danger in that, of course, we are so polarised, and particularly if you're saying something on social media or you're saying something on a social media platform, it can very, very quickly get twisted. It can very quickly lead to other groups then jumping on that bandwagon, and then you don't feel safe. So you don't feel safe from an organisational perspective because nobody's got your back from that perspective. As Roger says, you don't feel safe that somebody in NHS England is going to have your back because we've got no national mandate effectively to speak out in that way. And you don't feel safe for your family and your own personal circumstances, because if you're like me and Ivan, if you live where you work, effectively, it's very easy to find out where people are and all of that kind of stuff at the moment. And there is a culture of fear. So there are multiple layers at the moment of threat against speaking out. So almost it's easier not to. And so if in Ivan's words of you are it, and your words of you are it, actually, do I want to be it? Because actually the threat for me, both professionally and personally, is significant. It takes quite a strong person to stand up and say, actually, you know what, I'm going to take the risk of that because I'm going to do the right thing. That's the test of leadership at the moment, and that's the test I think we are all going through in terms of what you say and what you don't say, and how much you push the boat and the risk that you run professionally and personally.
Can I add to that? Because I think that you just made so many good points there, because I think it's even harder for women of colour in leadership for some of the reasons that Rachna just spoke about. it's already so hard to break all of those barriers to get into very senior leadership positions, that to add another layer of you're being difficult, you're seen as being difficult, it does make you question, is this what I want to do? A couple of years ago, someone very well known in leadership, was giving me some mentoring advice and said, be really careful, Marianne, you'll be known as the EDI girl. You'll be pigeonholed. And I just went, I don't care. Because I don't care. Like I'm lucky enough to be in a job where I have an element of freedom. I have a portfolio career that kind of has given me some protection in terms of, where my salary is coming from. And I so strongly believe in equity that I'm not going to be shut up about it. But I understand the realities. I mean, somebody on LinkedIn yesterday commented on one of my posts and said, "Oh, be careful. Be careful what you write, Marianne. People might feel uncomfortable with what you're saying." So, I think that there's a lived reality. I think it's a difficult decision for people to make as to whether or not they want to be up and out. I think you can help in other ways. You don't necessarily have to be really out there and, really out there as an activist. I think there are lots of things that each of us can do within our roles around social justice that may feel more comfortable to other people. So I don't think there's one right way of doing it. And perhaps that we need a little bit more, role modeling as to what that could look like, because it's not going to be the same for everybody.
I was going to say, Mary, and I agree with you. And I think we need to have more conversations in the leadership space about this. So if I go back to allies and being true allies, having those leadership conversations about how things feel and what we can do to stand together and support each other is so important. But I also accept the point that actually not all leadership teams are diverse, and we work hard. We're certainly working hard to get our teams to be more diverse and people going into those senior roles. But for me, it is being able to have the safe conversations that enable you to stand together and move forwards.
Yeah, I was going to say, really on the point that Rachna was saying, and that is, I think people underestimate how often and how wearing it can be when you are constantly the only one in the room. Constantly, from meeting to meeting, place to place, circumstance to circumstance, you're the one in the room, and you bear that weight because you know that in order to move things forward, not just for people that look like you, but actually for your city, the area that you serve. But you have what I'm talking about is that additionality that can make it difficult, and that's why people can make decisions. Even it's difficult enough being there, being able to get there if you want to get there. But even when you are there, you're sitting there going, do I really want to be here? Because, it's like each meeting I'm going into, the head spins and it's kind of, okay, so now we're going to the EDI speak. What do you think? Like, I feel like I didn't create this problem. I kind of need you guys to be there to help us to fix this problem. So I think there is an additional weight on global majority leaders. I think there needs to be some kind of recognition of that. We're not crying, we're not bleating about it, but I think it's nice to know that it's recognised. That you have to deal with a lot more simply walking into a room. Things that, interestingly, are often taken for granted. Somebody will do a statement, and you'll hear this consensus of everybody agreeing, and you're sitting there going, "Hold on a minute, that's just absolutely nothing to do with my experience and the experience of people that look like me." But it's almost so now I've got to not only dealing with it for me, I'm now having to change the temperature of that room to just get them to ask the right question that actually is more inclusive. Where if you don't say anything, that it kind of just runs through as if it's nothing. So it's it's not that it's an impossible thing. It's not a thing that we're not willing to do. But I think it does come at a kind of individual cost, and I think you almost have to have that Marianne approach where you're always prepared to say, well, at the end of the day, I'm going to say it, and let's see what happens. Let's see where the chips land after that.
So we know the data shows clear and persistent inequities in leadership, from who gets promoted to who gets heard to who feels safe speaking up. So why is there almost never time on leadership agendas to talk about culture and inclusion, even though the evidence is right in front of us? What is it that leaves leaders feeling disempowered, unsupported, or unwilling to make this an everyday priority?
And I go into lots of boards, and I think there's 3 or 4 things. The first one is your point about culture. People don't spend time on culture. It's difficult. We walk past it. There's too many other priorities. We don't see culture as the cornerstone of success. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the narrative is rubbish, because at best we present this as a moral imperative. It is a moral imperative, but it's also the case that we need to see this as about improvement, not just about compliance. So one of the problems has been, we'll give it to a fairly low paid EDI person to check we're not breaking the law. So it has everything we say about culture is about improvement, and that should include tackling racism and being proactive about it. Which leads me into the third thing. What we have is a system for change which relies upon individuals to raise concerns rather than the organisation being proactive and preventative and going out and being curious and looking for things and using the data. Trusts are sinking in data. We know, I walk into a trust, I can tell you where the problems are. You could probably do the same. And then finally, it's about 2 other things. The most important one, I think, is stop doing things that are performative and which we know are not going to make much, if any, difference. So we put vast amounts of energy, for example, into unconscious bias training. That was the fad a couple of years ago. There's no evidence that unconscious bias training will do more than raise cognitive understanding. It will help people understand. It does not make any significant difference to decision making. Similar, and by the way, as an aside, the recent, be slightly political here, if I may be, Sylvia, the recent circular saying that trusts have to put every single member, 1.6 million people, through mandatory 3-hour training on racism, anti-Semitism. There's no evidence base to it whatsoever. It's counterproductive. So we have to do things that are likely to work. That's what a director of nursing or a medical director faced with an outbreak of MRSA would be able to answer the question. We're doing this because the evidence says this is the most likely one to bring about the difference we want to make. We haven't been doing that around diversity, and particularly not about race. And perhaps the sort of final bit of that jigsaw is we have in the process of over relying on individuals raising concerns and training, we've ignored a huge body of evidence that says the key thing is to insert accountability and to change processes rather than simply relying on changing people. And to do that, though, and particularly allies need to show courage. They need to prioritize it, and they need to not walk past the problem. And there are trusts that are really getting their teeth into this very effectively. Unfortunately, there are lots of trusts that are not, as Rashna kind of said earlier. So I think we do know what works, but the system and individual organizations have to work out how to do it. And to some degree have to be spoon-fed, because clearly lots of them, this stuff's been around for years. They are not just not doing it, they are refusing to do it and instead do performative things. Sorry, that's a bit of a kind of high horse rant.
No,
I think we do know the sorts of things that are more likely to work, and we have to do them. But to do them requires leaders with courage who understand that this is about improvement, not just about compliance.
I was going to say, Roger, I absolutely agree with you. And we have started this on a very, very small scale. It is small at the moment, but what we did, and we've picked one area in our business, that's all we're tackling at the moment. But what we did is ask the staff what would make the difference for them. What were the things that we needed to put in place from one part of the system to the other to make that difference? And we've started to roll out some of that, and we've started to see the changes. I always say, what you walk past, you condone. So if you walk past something that is not acceptable, you condone that, and behaviour breeds behaviour, so it carries on. So absolutely being able to tackle it in the moment. But what we also heard was that people didn't feel confident that the organisation would stand behind them if they said this behaviour is not acceptable. So I'm going to now withdraw myself from whatever I'm doing because what I'm experiencing is not acceptable. And we've put things in place that means staff have things that they can fall back on and said, you said I could do this, you said I could withdraw if this was happening to me. So I think it is a leadership thing. But I also think quite often as leaders, we stand up and say things, and then all our policies and procedures work completely against what we're saying. So we say it in one breath, but actually, when people experience the policies, the processes, whatever it is, the systems, they don't align with the words. And I think it's really important that you align those systems, processes, policies with the words you're using.
Yeah, no, I think that, everything that Roger said is so important. To me, the evidence base, which, in the NHS, we tend to just copy our neighbour. Oh, such and such did it down the road like this. Let's just do that. And I'm going, well, where's the evidence base? Show me why you think this initiative will work. And then we wonder why we haven't got any money and we didn't get any impact. So
Yes.
I think that two things that I see trusts make mistakes on. One is just having an action plan with way too many actions on it, pages and pages of actions without really any metrics to track the improvement that Roger's talking about or the narrowing of the gap. And a lack of being able to prioritize within that action plan. And a lack of discipline, I think, as well. And what I mean by discipline is not thinking of, the actions in a long enough time period. So they go, oh, it's a 12-month project. No, it's not. Like, it took 400 years to get like this. It will take a long time until, some of these problems are sorted. And anyone who knows about, organizational development, culture change takes 5 to 8 years.
Yeah.
So why do we think EDI will take a shorter period of time than that? So for me, I think the main points are choose 2 or 3 things, do them well, have accountability for them at the board level, and measure them to track whether or not there's impact.
And Marianne, I would absolutely agree. I also think we shouldn't shy away from trying things as long as we do the learning and reflection, because sometimes they won't work. But actually, it's the learning and reflection that's important, because sometimes I think we have to take some bold, courageous steps that might be riskier in whether they work or not. But as long as we do the learning and reflection and take that forward.
There is something about the deliberative nature of what we do, though. So doing things for the sake of writing a beautiful action plan, and we can write a beautiful action plan in the NHS. We know that, and it will be, all the bit that's missing always is going to be A, the evidence base, and B, the metrics about how you're going to know it works. And I don't necessarily mean hard metrics. I mean the quantitative as well as the qualitative. But the biggest difference a board can make, if you genuinely roll back, is listening to patients and listening to our colleagues are two of the strongest things that we could do. And what do? We do 7,000 page paper packs for board meetings, which you need a PhD to actually decipher what the intent is behind some of those papers. So if I'm sitting there from a community group and I want to influence, I have very little influence unless I've got A, the literacy, and B, the ability to be able to then communicate the point that I'm trying to make. So one of the simplest things is actually those kind of pre-board meetings that I think it was Roger who talked about, in terms of actually sitting down with a representative of your community or your staff group or whomever, taking them through it and getting a view with a broad range of people. That wouldn't take long at all, but could be a deliberative step to understanding and listening actively, and it wouldn't cost anything. This is the usual problem in the NHS, isn't it? And social care, that we've got no money to do anything. That's free. It's an hour's time. Let's do, that kind of action absolutely deliberatively could be taken.
As we close out part 2, we're reminded that courage in this space comes from staying committed to speaking up, committed to trying new approaches, and committed to doing the work well. Psychological safety plays a big part in that. Senior leaders can only lead with honesty when they feel supported to speak openly without fear of consequences or cancellation. Embedding inclusion into our cultural DNA means choosing what matters most and doing it with intention and consistency. It means creating environments where honest conversation in genuinely safe spaces becomes everyday practice, not an exception. Now that's a real strength in the struggle, continuing to lead with clarity and purpose even when the pressures compete and the work feels heavy. Well, in our final series, we'll be moving from insight to action, exploring some real practical ways to achieve meaningful and lasting cultural change. Join us next time as we continue to stand firm in power, because resilience is how we change culture.